My name is Charlie Winkler-Smith. I'm from the KTN. I'm just going to run through a few bits of housekeeping before we get started. So because we've got quite a few people on this call, we've muted all of the participants. So if you do have any technical problems, then please use the chat box, and my colleague Poonam will be able to give you some advice. If you have any questions to the speakers, then please use the Q&A box, and then at the end of each presentation, we'll then ask the speaker on your behalf. There'll also be a big Q&A session at the end, so we should be able to get through most of your questions. But I will now hand over to Joe Hill from Innovate UK. Joe. Joe, I think you need to unmute.
Start. Welcome everybody. Thanks very much for joining this webinar. I'm Joe Hill. I'm the GCRF Programme Manager. I've been in touch with all of you, I think, by email, most of you. It's a huge shame that we can't meet face to face, obviously, as we originally intended. But I hope that this webinar will go some way towards a welcome and an introduction to the first Demonstrate Impact cohort. So these are really challenging times, of course, and something that we certainly didn't predict. But I've been amazed at how you've responded so far in terms of looking at creative ways to continue some of the project activities and finding workarounds and to do what you can under the circumstances. And we're also going to try and do everything that we can to be as flexible as possible to support you. And I'll talk about that in much more detail at the end of the seminar, particularly around flexibility, around phase 1 and phase 2. So today on the agenda, we've got some really interesting speakers who will talk about their area of expertise. And as well, they will also reflect on the current situation and how businesses might be able to adapt or find opportunities at this time. We've got Jenny Parker coming up after me from an agency called Humanly, and she's going to talk about using human-centered design as part of the innovation process, as well as a few techniques that can be adapted to enable remote working. Jake from KTN will then talk about how you can access a human-centered design coach as part of our support package, if that's something that you're interested in. I know many of you are. And then it's 11:30, we've got Jim Totti from Earth Capital, who's going to talk about the investment landscape and how to raise risk capital, particularly at this challenging time. Then we've got Zoe from Innovate UK, who's going to talk about gender equality and social inclusion and how to ensure compliance with our policies on this in your project work. And then at the end, I will have a section on what we're looking for out of phase 1, how we can support you through that, and how we're going to handle the phase 2 applications given the current circumstances. So there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end of each session, and so write your questions in the Q&A box, as Charlie said, and we'll try our best to answer them within the time frame. And if there are more questions than we can answer, then we will follow up and answer all of those by email tomorrow. So first of all, I want to introduce you to the support team. So I'm the Programme Manager across the GCRF portfolio at Innovate, and I'm happy to take a very hands-on approach. So feel free to reach out to me directly at any time. We have Charlie and Jake from KTN, and they will help broker support, particularly the human-centered design coaches that I mentioned, as well as organising any future webinars that we may need, support around investment readiness or webinars on IP, etc. And of course, you each have a monitoring officer who you will have been in touch with directly, and I hope actually they're all on the call today, which is great. They'll help you throughout phase 1 with your progress and any change requests you want to make to your project. And up there in the corner is a LinkedIn group that we've just set up. It's a private group just for this cohort that will help you connect with each other. because obviously one of the most valuable forms of support often comes from other entrepreneurs, because you really understand what it's like at the coalface. And so I want to encourage as much peer support as possible within the group. Now, obviously we can't do that face to face as we had wanted, but I hope you've all seen the brochure with your profiles. And that's intended to be a networking tool to help you get to know about each other. Who's working in the same country as you, who's working in the same sector, etc. And we can also facilitate any connections that you might like to make as well. So, as this is the first cohort, I just want to do an introduction in terms of what we're looking for out of phase one, what our aims are for, and what we'd like to see in terms of outcomes. So in phase one, you may or may not know, we had 155 applications, and we have funded 31 of those businesses. You're working across 23 countries and you're addressing 8 SDGs. Health, water and sanitation are the most prevalent SDGs that are being addressed, and then others are fairly evenly spread. So, as you know, Demonstrate Impact is funded by the Grand Challenges Research Fund, and it's designed to support pioneering research and innovation in tackling issues in developing countries. And we only came on board last year at Innovate UK to be a delivery partner for this, specifically to focus on the commercialisation piece of work. Why did we launch Demonstrate Impact? Well, we believe that there are innovative solutions out there to sustainable development challenges, but they're not always being applied in developing countries. And one of the biggest reasons for this is risk. Businesses and investors may think it's too risky to enter developing country markets with new innovations. And customers and users may be reluctant to buy new, innovative, unproven solutions. So Demonstrate Impact is really designed as a de-risking mechanism to overcome some of those challenges and support innovations to get to market quicker. So we really want to support innovations that have the potential for transformative change, and that's why we've chosen you as our first cohort, because we believe that your innovations have this potential to potentially create markets, boost infrastructure, create jobs, and strengthen value chains. What outcomes do we want to see? Well, this is ODA funding, and so it's very important that the primary benefit must be to disadvantaged people in developing countries, either directly through benefiting from the new product or service, or indirectly through benefiting from jobs or better supply chains or better infrastructure and so on. So to give an example, if there was a water filter solution, for example, that was really only accessible to middle class or wealthy households, that would not comply with our ODA requirements. It's really about access, and these innovations and benefits must be accessible to more disadvantaged communities within those developing countries. That's where we really want to see the social impact. As a secondary outcome, we are obviously wanting to see UK businesses benefit from being able to test their innovations in new markets and find new collaborators and partners and so on. So, as you know, we've divided the competition into 2 phases, and this is phase 1, and really this is about discovery, whereas phase 2 is more about prototyping. Why have we divided it like this? Well, the reason that we've put in phase 1 is so that you have the time to really explore the feasibility of your innovation in the target market. Is it appropriate? Will you need to adapt it to the local context to make it affordable, appropriate, desirable, and so on? And the reason that we have built this in is because it can be very easy when you're developing new innovations to get very tunnel vision on the technology and the tools and working to improve those. And so this is a chance to look beyond that and gain insights into how users might respond to your innovation or stakeholders and so on. And so it's really a chance to get those real world insights into the target market. So you can use phase one to figure out exactly what's needed rather than rushing in and launching something that might not work or might cost waste money or time later. I think one thing I want to say, particularly in relation to developing countries, is it's very important in phase one to distinguish between need and demand. It's very easy to see a lot of need in developing countries. For example, many people need access to clean water. The evidence is everywhere. There's no doubt about that. But that doesn't mean that people are going to want to buy a water filter to solve that problem. You know, just as many of us, including me, need more exercise, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to want to buy a gym membership. So people behave in unexpected ways and they want very particular solutions to their problems. And so phase one is all about this. It's all about understanding that human behavior in your target market, finding out what people really want and how they want to solve their particular problems, and if your innovation can meet that demand. So we hope that phase one is going to be a really useful opportunity for you to gain those insights, identify all the partners you need for phase two, and gain confidence in that market. And broadly, at the end of phase one, we will ask or look at, have the activities you've done got you into a position of being ready to demonstrate in phase two? A couple more points on this. We're very comfortable at this stage of phase one with uncertainty and ambiguity, because that's what phase one is all about, exploring in terms of feasibility. And we are looking to support pioneering innovations, and we know, of course, that that brings risk. And we know that some projects in phase one may not work. The innovations might not be technically feasible, there might not be enough demand or stakeholder support, and so on. And so this is really the opportunity to find that out, to either pivot or iterate or stop. So we feel that this stage is really crucial de-risking mechanism, this early stage design work in phase one, and that your innovation is more likely to gain traction and your business is more likely to gain economic value and more likely to attract investment as a result of the work done in phase one. So that sets out our aims. The challenge now, obviously, is to do that with the current restrictions and travel bans in place. So we are able to offer time extensions and budget change requests if you need to move money to local partners or hire new subcontractors, for example. And again, I'll talk much more about that at the end of the webinar, in the phase one and the phase two section at the end of the webinar. But for now, I'll answer a few questions if you have any at the moment. Otherwise, we'll move on to our first speaker.
We don't yet have any questions, so
okay.
Move on.
Okay, that's fine. We'll probably pick up lots of questions at the end, I expect. So our first speaker is Jenny, who's just going to share her screen now. She's going to talk about the value of using human-centered design in innovation, and more broadly, obviously, and she will also share a few techniques for gaining local insights remotely if you're not able to travel yourselves to the country, but also plenty of techniques that you can also use, hopefully, once the travel bans have lifted. So a mix there, and ask her any questions. So over to you, Jenny.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so welcome to this introduction to human-centered design. I will begin by telling you a little bit about Humanly, and then we'll go through the human-centered design process, look at a case study of the process in action, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail into the research phase, which maps across the discovery phase of your projects. So first of all, a little bit about Humanly. We are an award-winning design studio specialising in design for social impact, and we are based in the UK, although we work internationally. We're a small team of 4, and I'm the founder and director of Humanly. My background is in design, and I actually started my career at the UN. So started off working in international and humanitarian contexts, and I've been working in the field of design for social impact for the past 10 years. At Humanly, we develop human-centered solutions, so things like products, services, and systems. And we also develop human-centered organizations. So we help other organizations to become more human-centered in their practice and apply some of the same ways of thinking and methodologies as we do. We work with a wide range of organizations who share our commitment to social impact. This ranges from national charities like Macmillan to national and local government to international NGOs and UN agencies. And we work on a really wide range of topics. We work on complex social problems, and we specialise in working with vulnerable groups. So some of the issues we've tackled in the past include health and social care issues. We've worked on cancer, adult social care, and internationally we've worked with refugees. We've worked on empowering women and girls, climate change, a really wide range of different issues. And as I mentioned, we work all over the world. So we've worked in 12 countries and 4 continents. Actually missing from that map is Pakistan, which is our most recent international project, where we are currently working on a large health behaviour change project. And I've had a look through your brochure, and we've worked in a number of the countries that your projects will be focused on as well. So next we'll have a look at the human-centred design process. So this is our visualisation of the process. It is basically the same as the double diamond, which I know you will have seen. And it also mirrors other well-known processes like IDEO's 3-stage process, which is visualized as a kind of wiggly line. So we visualize the process like this to highlight the iterative nature of the process. And we've divided it into 3 phases of research, co-creation and prototyping, which we believe are the 3 phases required to develop effective solutions to complex social problems. And as part of this process, we engage a wide range of people at every stage, and we take care to create meaningful and rewarding experiences for everyone that is involved. So as part of the process, we start with research. We identify the people who are affected by the problem or have a stake in the problem. And then we usually do ethnographic and creative research with those people to take a deep dive into the problem and try to build empathy and gain as much insight as possible to lead to opportunities for doing things differently. Building on that insight, in the second phase, we facilitate co-creation by actively involving all stakeholders in a collaborative idea generation process. This includes empowering end users or beneficiaries to create potential solutions to their own problems. And once hundreds of ideas have been generated, we usually look for themes and we evaluate ideas democratically before selecting a few ideas and developing those into fully fleshed concepts. The final phase is prototyping, in which we bring those ideas to life rapidly and test them to find out what works and doesn't work in practice. This allows us to iterate and improve on potential solutions before any costly implementation. And this phase eventually leads to a stable solution that is ready to move into a pilot. So there are a number of key principles that guide the human-centered design process. It is bottom-up, starting from real human needs, democratic, empowering users to solve their own problems. It's collaborative, actively involving stakeholders in co-creation, and it's iterative, based on prototyping potential solutions early on. And we believe that this approach has many advantages over traditional processes for tackling complex social problems. So we find that traditional approaches to developing and delivering solutions often begin with a predefined idea for what the solution should be, and that idea is often based on assumptions. In this process, only one idea for a solution is generated, which is then built, piloted, and implemented at scale. This approach only allows for small adjustments to be made, as a great deal of investment goes into developing the solution early on. Human-centered design, on the other hand, is a creative problem-solving approach that begins with problems and building a deep understanding of the needs of the people affected by the problem through first-hand research. In this process, lots of ideas for potential solutions are generated based on user insights and other evidence generated from the research conducted. And these ideas are then prototyped as quickly and cheaply as possible before any costly build or implementation. So that was a brief introduction to human-centered design and the values that we embody in the process. But the best way to understand the process is to see it in action. So I'll now present a case study of a Humanly project. And the goal of this project was to design complaints and feedback mechanisms for internally displaced people in South Sudan. This project was carried out for the World Food Programme, and it focused on protection of civilian camps in South Sudan. In 2016, when the project took place, there were 6 protection of civilian sites in South Sudan across 5 regions, housing an estimated 223,926 civilians. And that year, WFP provided emergency assistance to approximately 4 million people throughout South Sudan. Our project was conducted in 2 POC sites, which together housed more than 38,000 people. WFP delivered food to the populations of these sites approximately monthly, and the food was distributed via implementation partners. To access the food, residents of the POC site had to register for a food ration card, and then they were able to collect food rations on food distribution days. So that's the context of the service WFP was providing, and the challenge was how to create more dialogue with the people accessing that service. So the project team was international, and the client was WFP South Sudan, and locally 4C Consulting were a research company based in Juba, South Sudan, whose team of researchers conducted all of the field work. And then over in London, M&C Saatchi World Services were involved, bringing global research and communications expertise. We were brought in to deliver human-centered design expertise to the project. So the first phase of work was the research phase. And this phase began with a 3-day collaborative research planning session, which took place between the 3 organisations involved, so Humanly, M&C Saatchi World Services and 4C Consulting. And during this session, we identified the target participant groups that we wanted to engage in the research, as well as the key research themes and questions that we wanted to explore. A wide range of human-centered design research methods were considered before a selection of methods and tools were chosen to best fit with the research themes and the needs of the target participants that we selected. And by working closely with the local agency in South Sudan, we adapted these methods to be culturally sensitive and visually engaging, as we knew a lot of the participants would be unable to read or write. So just to give you an idea of what the research looked like, we developed 7 research themes for service users, and that included things like people's understanding and experiences of the food aid system, cultural norms and traditions around food, daily life and social dynamics within the POC, how people get information and communicate, and people's experiences of and attitudes towards complaints and feedback. So as you can see, we didn't just look at complaints and feedback, but we're building quite a broad picture of people's experiences. And to explore those themes, we designed 8 human-centered design research methods to be run with service users and service providers. These included things like social network mapping, which is a technique to map people's social networks and identify who they might go to in relation to different problems. Journey mapping, which we used to explore the journey that people go through to register for, collect, store, cook and eat food. And other activities like asking POC residents to give the researchers a guided tour of the camp, and shadowing activities to be conducted with staff members. To support the local research team to carry out this research, which was quite different to any research they'd done before, we developed a handbook. And this handbook provided step-by-step instructions on how to carry out each activity, and it included visualizations of what the research outputs should look like at the end. So these are some photos that we got back from the researchers of the research sessions in action. So using the researcher's handbook and the tools, the local researchers were able to carry out all of the field research. I should mention that this project was quite challenging in that just after we began the project, international people were not allowed to enter South Sudan or leave South Sudan, which was enforced for the duration of the project. So we weren't able to go there even to do face-to-face training with the researchers. So everything was done remotely, but we provided coaching, and the researchers did a fantastic job of carrying out the fieldwork. And it turned out that the activities we had developed with them were very popular with the participants, who were very engaged in the sessions. And as the research progressed, the local team shared write-ups and photographs from the activities, and we in London led on the analysis of the results and generating insights, as well as checking in regularly with the local team to make sure that we were interpreting the results correctly and to provide feedback and coaching on how best to conduct the research activities. Working closely with the local team, we developed a number of key insights, which we clustered around 5 themes. So these were quite broad, ranging from things like community solutions that we had discovered through the research to creating dialogue and what that might look like. Other key research outputs included a synthesized user journey, illustrating the stages that people go through in order to register for, collect, store, cook and eat the food that WFP provides, including key findings related to each stage of the service. A set of personas were also created to highlight different types of people that we engaged, and that helps to bring the research findings to life and inform the idea generation phase. So following the research, ideas were developed in a co-creation process. Based on the insights generated, key opportunity areas were identified and explored during collaborative brainstorming sessions with the wider M&C Saatchi World Services team. And in parallel, we conducted desk research to inform and inspire ideas for solutions. All of these ideas were evaluated and refined down into 3 chosen concepts, which were then worked out in detail with input from the 4CA team in Juba. The 3 concepts that we developed all represented a potential new touch point for dialogue between WFP and the people it serves. These included a physical feedback wall that would be moved around the POC sites to gather people's views visually, a free mobile phone charging station where people would be signed up to take part in SMS surveys, and a community kitchen where women would have access to vital cooking equipment and a safe space to discuss issues affecting women in the POC. These concepts were taken into the POC sites for feedback from residents, with over 1,700 people inputting their views and ideas. This also doubled up as a prototype of some elements of the feedback wall concept, as I will explain in the next part of this presentation. The final phase of work was prototyping, where ideas were brought to life and tested to see what worked and didn't work in practice. We carried out prototyping activities to test 2 of the 3 concepts, and these activities were run again in the field by the local moderators. To help them do this, we again provided step-by-step instructions and coaching on how to run each prototype. So the first prototype was the feedback wall, on which the visual posters that you saw before were created to represent our 3 concepts and printed large scale and attached to flip chart stands. These were moved around the POC sites to get people's views and ideas, and the team of moderators carried out different roles in order to capture as much data as possible. So there was someone welcoming people and encouraging them to take part, another person engaging people to vote for their favourite idea and give feedback, someone conducted exit interviews, and there was an observer just looking at the whole scene and how people became interested and took part. The prototype was run over 6 days in 5 different locations, and over 1,700 people took part in total. The second round of prototyping related to the mobile point concept, in which we carried out 3 rounds of prototyping to test different variables. In order to increase people's likelihood of understanding the SMS messages, they were sent in 3 different languages, and the role of incentives was also explored by offering incentives during some rounds but not others to see what difference this made. So the way it worked was that an initial SMS was sent out to test whether people would reply to a quantitative SMS survey question from WFP. And if people responded, a follow-up SMS was sent to ask for more information to test whether people would provide a longer response to a qualitative question. Follow-up phone interviews were carried out with both people who did respond as well as people who didn't respond in order to understand motivations and barriers. And in total, 262 SMS were sent and 87 follow-up interviews were conducted. So these prototypes involved quite a lot of people, but other projects we've done, we've prototyped things on a smaller scale with much smaller numbers of people. So this isn't to say that you can't do prototyping unless you involve these kind of numbers of people. This was just a particular project where we had the possibility to do something a bit bigger. So in conclusion, the project achieved a wide range of outcomes. We generated evidence around different routes to enabling people to have dialogue between POC residents and WFP. And this led WFP to kind of pivot in their approach. They initially were looking at setting up a helpline, and through the process, they recognised the importance of having people collect feedback on the ground in person. We also built the local research organisation's human-centred design capacity, and we're really passionate about doing this to reduce dependency on international experts. There was a successful international collaboration across continents with an effective mix of different expertise working together remotely, and the human-centred design process was successfully applied in a fragile and conflict-affected state, and we managed to engage over 2,000 internally displaced people. In the last section of this presentation, I will go into a bit more detail on the research phase of the human-centred design process. So human-centred design research, or discovery as it's known in this programme, has a number of key principles as well. It is broad, so it looks at people's day-to-day experiences more widely to build up a rich picture of people's whole lives, not just the topic we're exploring. It's open-minded, challenging assumptions about the problem we're exploring and the people we're carrying out research with. It tends to be ethnographic and uses a lot of observation techniques to learn from what people do as well as what they say. And it's creative, involving participants in hands-on activities to explore their experiences. I realise that might be quite challenging right now, but I will share some tips for doing that remotely as well. So just to give you a quick example of some of these, when we talk about going broad, in the research we never just ask people about the topic we've been asked to explore. So just to conduct a simple example, imagine we're doing some research about cereal to inform the development of a new product. As well as asking people about cereal, we would also ask them about breakfast more generally. We would go beyond that as well to look at how breakfast would fit into their normal morning routine and what else is happening at that time of day that might influence their breakfast choices. We might expand that out further to look at their typical week, including things like their food shopping habits and the other meals they have. And we might even go as broad to look at their priorities in life, including how important they consider different things, such as health, family, and work. And by building up a broad picture of people's attitudes, motivations, barriers, and enablers, we can develop a much deeper understanding of the topic we're exploring. Another key aspect of the research phase is challenging assumptions. This comes up in absolutely every project. We all have assumptions based on what we know about a topic or a particular group of people. But the important thing is just to try to identify those assumptions and test them and keep an open mind when we do so. So for example, these are some examples that we personally had in past projects. So we did a project with people living with dementia, which was about independent living. And the assumption we all had was that people living with dementia experience difficulties remembering how to do daily tasks. Another project in which we worked with people living with cancer saw us make the assumption that diagnosis and treatment were the most difficult times of a cancer journey. And the third example is when we worked with people with learning disabilities on a project in which some services were being reduced or shut down or changed. And the assumption in that project was that people with learning disabilities don't like change. However, when we conducted research in each of these projects, we challenged those assumptions and changed our minds. So in the dementia example, we found out that people living with dementia tend to experience problems remembering that a task needs done before they experience problems with how to do the task. So for example, remembering that they need to take a drink before forgetting how to make a cup of tea. And for people living with cancer, often finishing treatment is really challenging because people around them don't always understand the ongoing consequences of cancer and treatment for cancer, and a lot of the support they've had suddenly drops off. And finally, we realised that all people don't like change if they don't have choice and control, or haven't been told what's happening and don't have time to prepare. So this is of course true for people with learning disabilities. So it's not something particular to that group of people, and we can actually remember that if we inform people of what's happening and involve them, then it can be possible. So finally, we'll have a look at some of the methods we use in the research process. So I mentioned that we do ethnographic and creative research. So here's a few examples of the more ethnographic approach. So this might include things like observing people engage in an activity to engage insight into their behaviour. We might do things like immersion, where we actively engage in an activity with people. So not just observing them, but doing something together to break down barriers and build rapport. Shadowing someone while they carry out everyday activities, for example, their day-to-day work. We might ask people to show us objects of importance and tell us how they use them and any hacks they've developed. And asking people to give us a guided tour of places of importance, such as their local community, home, or workplace. We also use lots of hands-on creative activities. For example, this might include things like asking people to create a visual poster of a typical week in their life. Journey mapping, which involves mapping out different stages that people go through when using a specific product or service, or the stages of a broader life experience. Asking people to create a mini version of themselves. Card sorting activities in which people are asked to make choices using a set of visual cards. Social network mapping, where participants map out the people around them by level of trust. And drama activities, where people are asked to role play different scenarios. Lastly, I wanted to touch upon remote research, as I know a big challenge at the moment is conducting face-to-face activities with people. While human-centred design research thrives on first-hand observation and hands-on activities, there are ways of doing research remotely. For example, cultural probes are physical kits that can be provided to participants to self-document their experiences through activities and tasks. So there are a couple of examples here of projects we've done where we have used this technique. So on the left is a written diary and a set of stickers used to anonymously capture young people's experiences and views on sexual health in China. And on the right is a kit with disposable cameras that we created. So a red camera to capture essentially bad experiences and a green camera to capture good experiences. And we used that to capture the day-to-day experiences of a young man with profound and multiple learning disabilities and non-verbal communication. So yeah, things like cameras, stickers, diaries are all really good things to include in cultural probe kits that you can send out to people. And you can have them post them back to you, or you can collect them in some way. And mobile phones can also be used for self-documentation. And these allow activities and tasks to be sent to participants in real time using their mobile phones. Another great way of getting getting insights from people's experience remotely is just conducting in-depth telephone interviews. And you can even do things like journey mapping remotely by going through the same set of questions that you would normally do with something visual, like a journey map, and then you can retrospectively map people's answers onto a visual template and even send that to people to check if you captured people's experiences correctly. So there's lots of things you can still do, even though it might be a little bit more challenging. So that's it from me. Thanks for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thanks very much, Jenny. That was really excellent, really interesting. I've got a few questions here. Some of them you have covered off, but I'll just ask them anyway in case you have anything extra to add.
Sure.
So here's one from Larissa. Regarding the cultural probes and kits which people do at home, how have you incentivized users in developing nations where they may have different needs, which are more of a priority than filling in a diary, for example?
Right, so I think incentives generally are quite an interesting subject. We always try to think about what would be meaningful and rewarding to people, and try to do this in quite a personal way. So for every project, we'll think about the ethics around incentives and what would be the most meaningful thing to someone. For a project like the South Sudan project, interestingly enough, one of the major problems people had within the POC was just boredom. There was just nothing to do. So something like the feedback wall generated so much interest and positivity because people had something to engage in and feedback on. So actually, I don't think any incentive was provided around those prototypes. Whereas other prototypes and research that we've done, we have used various incentives. In the UK, we might use things like supermarket vouchers or Amazon vouchers if a kind of financial incentive is more meaningful to people. Or we've done things really personal. So for the dementia project, we worked with someone who had a hat covered in badges, and we bought him a badge for his hat, which he absolutely loved. So it can really vary. In developing contexts, it's just really important to, I would say, work with local partners, and they'll probably be the best people to guide you on what might work for people, or simply asking people what would be a meaningful reward for their time.
Thanks. I've got one here about, have you got any practical tips with regards to remote training and communications to partners in countries that don't have access to high-speed internet or communications infrastructure?
Yes, we do. This is a challenge we've recently experienced. I was supposed to fly to Pakistan about 2.5 weeks ago to deliver face-to-face training to our research partner, who's going to be conducting some field work around the health behaviour change project I mentioned. And what we've ended up doing is recording video tutorials that people can watch even if they don't have connectivity. So they would need an internet connection to download the videos. We've also put them on YouTube as unlisted videos, but the idea is that people can watch those in their own time rather than, for example, having to connect to a Zoom call at a specific time and they've only got one chance to hear us basically explaining to them what they need to do in the research. So I've actually done a pre-recorded version of this same presentation, more or less, which we sent to them to watch, and then we've developed 15 video tutorials on all the different research activities that we were going to train them in. So, and we've actually put that into a Google form so that they can, you can drop videos into that quite easily, and then you can create things like quizzes to check people's understanding. I also recently discovered Google Classroom, which we've not used, which looks like it's got even more capabilities around that. It's difficult to do something with zero connectivity, but even if people can get online to download something, then they can maybe pursue it offline.
Great, that's a really helpful example, thanks. Here's one from Daisy. Due to the travel restrictions, we won't be able to go ahead with our planned co-creation workshops this month. Do you have any experience of running these remotely to gain insights before prototyping?
Yes, we do. So you can use, there are some really good online collaboration tools in which you can do things like more creative workshop type activities. If you think of a traditional brainstorming session, it would normally involve post-its, sticking up post-its on the wall. There's a really good tool called Miro, which is spelled M-I-R-O. And it's kind of an online whiteboard, and we've used that to have different people dial in from different locations onto a call and simultaneously log into this online space where you can recreate putting things on post-its and moving them around and clustering them and things like that. So we've had success with that, but that would obviously replicate a kind of traditional generating ideas on post-its type session. And if you were planning something different for your co-creation, you might need to think of an alternative, but that's just an idea.
And a follow-up from Daisy, do you need to use someone experienced in HCD to run remote interviews using journey mapping, etc.?
Not necessarily. If you look up things like customer journey mapping or user journey mapping, you can find different templates online. And really it's less about the template and the information you're gathering from people. So in a typical journey mapping activity, you would be going through something step by step, and you wouldn't just be looking at what happened, you'd also be looking at things like, how did people feel at each stage? What were people thinking? Who was around them at that time? What were their needs? Were those needs met or were they not met? What would have been helpful at different stages? So it's getting all those layers of information on someone's experience, and you could easily just ask people those questions over the phone, and then you could map it out on post-its on your own wall, or you could put it into something like a spreadsheet, or it doesn't need to be a kind of special visual template at the end like you might find online, but it's more about that kind of line of questioning and way of thinking. So not just looking at the kind of technicalities of what you're exploring, but also things like people's emotional journeys.
Thanks. This one is a tough question, but one that we'll be facing. At the moment, the problem is getting access to respondents, not so much the research techniques. Have you got any thoughts on how to overcome this? For example, this is from Sam, and actually the people they're trying to get access to are medics, which have other priorities, and they're available.
I mean, depending on who you're trying to recruit, medics is obviously quite a challenging one. We find that healthcare professionals, even say in the UK at a regular time and not an exceptional time like this, is quite challenging. Try to design the research around the needs of the people who you're asking to take part, and not the other way around. So a common pitfall is to say, oh, we're going to be doing interviews on this day and here are the slots, or for example, we're going to conduct a journey mapping at our office on these 3 dates. So what we always try to do is find out what would be the best time for the participant and the way of doing it. So someone like a GP, you know, that we might interview as part of a project here, might only have time for a 20-minute phone call at 8 o'clock in the morning before they start their day. So we'll work around their schedule basically. So you might just want to ask for less, or you might have to accept that they have other priorities at the moment, and you might need to just do your other research and postpone that research to the end of your project, for example. If it's really critical, just maybe try and think about what's the minimum you can ask for people, or you could email people a set of questions and have them just do it at a time that works for them, and things like that. Just think of ways you can chunk it down for people.
Great, that's really helpful. Thanks very much, Jenny. We're going to move on to Jake in a second. Just one thing I'd say is that we do appreciate it's a really challenging time at the moment, and one thing that might help is using a human-centered design coach on a one-to-one basis, which we are lining up as a support package. It is opt-in, not everyone has to do it, but it is available if you want to. And working with that designer, you can brainstorm all of these questions and ideas and alternative approaches to how you might tackle your current challenges and still gain the insights that you need to during phase one. So that's a good segue into Jake, who's going to talk about that now. If I don't know, Jake, if you have your presentation you can put up. But I just want to say a huge thanks, Jenny. That was really interesting and very enjoyable. Thanks very much for your time and input.
Great, nice to be here and hopefully meet some of you in person one day. Sorry I didn't get the chance to meet you all today.
Yes, that would be great, hopefully one day. Right, over to Jake.
Great. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Jenny. That was an excellent presentation. Hopefully everyone can see my slides and hear my voice.
Yes.
I'll assume it's a yes, and I'll continue on. So yeah, thank you. That's a really great intro into the design mentors that we've lined up for this Demonstrate Impact program. And serendipitously, I think, yeah, many of your questions that I can see in the Q&A, hopefully our mentors will be able to walk you through some of your specific challenges too. So let me talk a little bit more about the human-centered design coaching support that we've lined up. There we go. So what is it? So the objective of the Design Mentors program is to offer expert coaching and advice to those leading innovative R&D projects and ensure that the projects are completed to a high standard and preferably within time and within budget. And I'm sure that's important for all of you guys too. We've selected 18 mentors based on their expert knowledge and experience in human-centered design, but also because of their vast experience in bringing products and services to market in different contexts, many of them with overseas and low-income experience too. So as Joe says, we would like to, ideally we would have liked you to have met the mentors at this event in person, because we think it's a very much a personal relationship with a mentor, and it's about understanding your needs and walking you through those different solutions that could meet those needs. But given the current constraints, we've tried to curate a bit of a portfolio that will be shared with you after this event, and you may choose your like mentor based on your needs. So let me talk a little bit more about our mentors and how you may go about doing that. As I say, there's 18 of them. Here's a little snapshot of them. Yeah, they're from all over, and they have vast experience. I tried to do a little tally up of how much experience that they've got within design, and there's literally hundreds of years worth of design that's captured within these expert mentors here that you will have access to. Why do you want a like mentor? Well, many of you have got concerns that I can see in the Q&A box. But beyond that, there are lots of, so this is pulled directly from their profiles that are within the portfolio. They've got expertise in all sorts of things, from human-centered design and user research all the way through to different prototyping techniques, CNC machining, 3D printing, and then things beyond that, such as IP, brand and marketing, and expertise around aligning supply chains and packaging and things like this. Yeah, we may have a mentor. If you've got a very specific need, the likelihood is we may have a mentor that's got some experience in that area. So I would encourage you to check out the portfolio or talk to us to try and identify which mentor is most appropriate for you. Importantly, you may want to access their mentors because of their networks. So many of them have been practicing human-centered design for several decades and have built up a vast network of all different types of useful and interesting people, not just within design, but within other low-income contexts or manufacturers, so on and so forth. So you may not have a particular need, but it is always worth having a mentor, because you may run into some issues later on in your project, and your mentor may be able to help you with those challenges. As I say, there's a portfolio that will be shared with you after this webinar. In there, you can find some more details about each of the mentors and some further links so you can find out a bit more about them. Where are they? Well, they're all over the UK, but given the current situation, we're going to be offering mentorship exclusively via video conferencing. So you can utilize the expert mentorship from these people anywhere in the world at any time. And we think that's the most equitable and simplest way of offering mentorship given the current state. When can you obtain this advice and like coaching? Well, again, we want to offer you agency, and we want to offer you the control of who you receive help from and when you receive it. Some of you may want to have that help up front before your project starts. Some of you may want to distribute that help evenly across your project, and some of you may want to cash it in at the end when you're preparing for the next phase of this project, or you're looking to go for additional funding or investment or design for manufacture, whatever. The like way that we've tried to construct this mentorship program is that the mentors will be able to offer mentorship hours via video conferencing. Little asterisks there that different mentors will have different amount of hours available, just for various reasons. But we will be transparent with you about how many hours that you are able to spend with your mentor. And then it's for you and your mentor to negotiate in your kickoff meeting how and when you quote unquote spend those hours. And you may want to do it up front, you may want to distribute it evenly, or you may want to have it at the end. But that's up to you how you want to spend those hours. But it's important to recognize that it's your responsibility to plan and record how you spend those hours. We want you to get the help that is most appropriate for you. How do you sign up? So as I say, there'll be a portfolio that'll be sent around after this webinar. You can check out the different profiles of the 18 mentors in there, and check out the links as well that will take you onto their websites and LinkedIn profiles. Also will be a link to a survey where you can submit your first, second and third preferences. We've got an arbitrary deadline there of the 9th of April. If you could get your submissions in by the 9th of April, then we'll be able to allocate your mentors nice and promptly. I will then follow that up with a confirmation introductory email between you and your chosen mentor, where you can discuss, and I'll detail how many hours you've got available with that particular mentor, and then it's up to you and your mentor to negotiate how you then spend those hours. So yeah, as I say, arrange a kickoff meeting after that, where you can talk about all those things. Next steps. So yeah, please do look out for an email from Jess with the portfolio and the link to the survey. If you have any questions about specific needs or the particular capabilities of these mentors, then don't hesitate to speak to members from the KTN, probably me. I'll be able to answer your questions directly. And I'd like to re-emphasize that it's really important that, well, we believe that it's really important that it's a personal relationship between you and your mentor. So understanding your objectives in order to pair you with the right mentor is really important. So yeah, we want this to be of most benefit to you. So please do talk to us if you have any queries. So if you want to take a screenshot, or I'm sure my details could be found elsewhere, you can catch me at this email address or on the social medias. I think, yeah, that's it for me, because it's 10:30 and we're moving on to the next speaker now. Any last questions before I do pop off?
Thanks very much, Jake. That's great. Okay, one from Ollie. The mentorship scheme sounds great, but not sure our submission will be ready by the 9th of April. Will later submissions still be accepted?
Yes, I'm sure that's like fine. I don't want to. So one thing that I haven't mentioned is that we've given an upper limit for the amount of projects that one particular mentor can mentor on. So what I don't want to happen is for you to pick a person that you think is perfect as a mentor for you, only to find out later that we have allocated that mentor to someone else. So we're trying to look at people's first, second, third preferences so that we can get the right person to the right projects. So it's a fairly arbitrary deadline of like the 9th. The reason for choosing the 9th is that I'd like to allocate mentors before people's projects start, because many of you will have issues that you want to resolve before you get stuck in. I'm happy to extend that like deadline, but just for the to like hit the ground running for like most of you, I've arbitrarily chosen the 9th.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly flexibility around that, but just to keep that in mind.
Sure.
For if you want your first preference, the sooner you get your application in, the better. Tariq has asked, can you only choose one mentor?
Yes. So as I say, we would like it to be a personal relationship. Many of these mentors have got teams of people beyond them. And they may even call upon the expertise of their other colleagues within their agencies that they run. But we would like it to be a personal relationship. So we are offering one mentor per project. But please do pop in your first, second, third preferences in the survey, and we will try and ensure that you get the right one for your complex needs.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions for now. We're still on time, which is great. Thanks a lot, Jake. I'm really excited about this program. You've done a great...
Sorry, Joe. There's just one more question, which is when do you expect the allocation to happen, and when do you expect the kickoff meetings to happen? I will allocate mentors on the week following the 9th, so after the Easter holidays, and then so that'll be via an introductory email, and then it's for you and your mentor to figure out a time that suits both of your calendars to arrange the kickoff meeting. So kickoff is up to you, but expect an email from me the week following the 9th of April.
Great, thanks. Yes, sorry, I missed that question. Yes, so I'm really excited. You've lined up a fantastic pool of mentors, and we're really hoping to learn a lot from this process and how this works. Obviously, it is opt-in. You don't have to have one, but we do have enough resource to pay for each project to have a mentor if that is what they wish. So we will be really interested to see how this support works, and I hope that you'll make the most of it if that's something that you would like. Okay, great. So now I'd really like to introduce Jim Totty as our next speaker. If Jim would like to put his slides up. So Jim is the Director of Investment at Earth Capital, which is an international group of sustainable private equity investors. And Jim is an expert in clean and sustainable technology, and we'll be talking about raising capital and opportunities at this particularly challenging time. Charlie, do you know if Jim is online?
You hear me?
Oh, you are? Is that you, Jim?
Ah, sorry, you obviously didn't hear that last bit then. So, hi, Jim here. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak this morning. Like the other speakers, I'm sorry we can't do this face to face, but hopefully maybe we can all meet up a bit later in the year when things are back to normal and not all trying to stay safe for each other. I'm from Earth Capital. We are a specialist sustainable and impact private equity manager. We've been managing funds since 2008. And we invest in global markets, both developed and developing markets. So I guess I have a perspective from all those geographies, but significant investment activity in developing markets. We focus mostly on areas like energy and food and water, perhaps not so much health. I'm conscious a number of the participants in the program are in that area, but I will speak mostly from the perspective of energy, food and water and related sectors. And I guess for me, whether after today or if we do get to meet face to face, I'm always keen to see investment opportunities as a lot of the projects on the program develop to the stage where they're out in the market and then looking for commercial funding.
Jim, can I just ask, sorry, do you have some slides or not?
Sorry, you can't see them.
Can't see the screen at the moment.
Ah, sorry. Right, yes, I do. How do you want me to get them up?
If you,
I thought you'd already logged into my slides.
The share screen at the bottom, the green arrow button.
Okay. Okay, so can you see that now?
Yep. So if you just want to go into presenter mode.
Apologies, I didn't realise you couldn't see them.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
So, just skip over our disclaimer. So I'm going to talk about 4 things this morning. I'm going to talk about the investment market and the process that investors go through to make investments. I'm going to talk about what investors are particularly looking for in sustainability around the SDGs and this sector. I'm then going to talk about impact measurement, which is an important topic for everyone, both investors and investees, to consider as it's becoming an increasing part now of the investment process. And then I'm going to talk about current trends, 1 or 2 relating to the virus, but 1 or 2 longer term trends, and wrap up with that, and then we'll take questions at the end. So in terms of the investment market and process, I mean, the investment market is a food chain, and here is a map of that food chain. On the left, we start from early stage seed investment, and then we go all the way to the right for big private markets, part and infrastructure. And this is a map that all companies who are looking to fund and get funding will have to follow. The bottom right-hand arm is for operating and services and manufacturing businesses. The top right-hand arm is for businesses who are doing infrastructure rollout in areas like energy, agriculture, water, and so on. The seed market in Europe is active with tax money, so EIS and VCT funds, also very active crowdfunding scene as well. And although the virus has obviously dampened that market a little bit in the last few weeks, in recent years, that's been a very active area. People looking to raise a few £100,000, maybe £1 or £2 million. That's been a very active area of the market. As we move to slightly later stage investing, we get to institutional venture capital funds, people looking to raise Series A funds onwards. Then we're looking at larger fund managers, people who can write equity checks of 2, 5, 10 million plus, and take technologies through the series of venture rounds. And then we come to growth capital. Now this is often much less tech rich. Manufacturing and services people are often developing business models that are not particularly tech centered at all, just buying and delivering off-the-shelf technology. And similarly with asset developers, people who are building infrastructure in agriculture or energy or water. They're buying off-the-shelf kits and doing the planning and permitting and getting projects ready to invest. At the right-hand end, the latest stages on the map, bottom right-hand corner is private equity buyout. So these are for businesses that have reached the stage of being EBITDA positive and are looking to raise capital in the tens of millions, often with debt and leverage finance as well. And then the top right-hand corner is infrastructure, where we have funds that look to do asset construction and take construction risk. And then at the far end, on the right, top right-hand corner, people who look to invest in operating infrastructure, and they're looking for a cash yield. And we have a number of examples of funds in the market in areas like renewable energy and energy efficiency and battery storage offering those kind of yields. And then I think the final point to mention on the map is just to look at how the returns change. So with the seed funding, people are looking at returns of 5 or even 10 times their money for the very high risk early stage investments. By the time we get to institutional venture capital, it might be 4 to 5x. Growth capital, it might be 2 to 3x. But these are all substantial money multiples that people are looking for to compensate them for the risk they're exposing their capital to. When we get to the later stage investments, people think more in terms of IRRs and internal rates of return. On a buyout, 20% IRR, a smidge on either side is a typical target return. On the infrastructure, people might be looking for something in the 8 to 15% IRR range for taking construction risk, but perhaps for yielding proven and built infrastructure, something in the 5 to 8% yield is a typical level. So switching from the map to the process of how we as investors look at opportunities. So when we first meet a management team, whether it's at a conference like this or through another forum or perhaps an intermediary, I guess we look at 3 things initially when people send us a teaser or a pitch deck. 3 really critical things to start off the thinking. First is to make it clear that there's a large unaddressed market with customer pain that hasn't been met by existing products and services. The second thing to make very clear is that you have a successful product or service that addresses that market. And then the third is the management track record and the understanding that the management team who know how to stitch all the pieces together and have delivered these kind of companies and successfully delivered them before. We'll then take that, if we're satisfied with those initial steps, and we'll write a briefing note for our investment committee to consider. And that will often be a 1-page note at this stage, but setting out the key features of the opportunity and allowing our investment committee to do an initial review and flag up any issues, strengths, weaknesses, and so on that they see before we start doing heavier lifting. Now, the heavy lifting involves reviewing the full information memorandum or business plan and the data room, if there's a data room as well. One key thing we like to see from management at this point is a vision of the exit. It's a very important test of a CEO and their management team early in the process to know what do they actually want to build? What's their vision of the business in 5 years' time? How big will it be? What revenues will look like? What markets will it be operating in? And how does that then allow investors to achieve an exit event, a liquidity event? Because we manage funds typically with 7 to 10 year lives. So we can't sit in there for decades. We have to be looking to achieve liquidity from 5 years onwards. And that exit vision is a really important feature that we look for. And it's a very good test of a management team that's got that vision and knows what they're trying to achieve and where they want to go with their business. And then we'll think about structure and valuation. Are you looking at equity or a convertible debt structure? And what kind of pre-money and post-money valuation are we looking at? And to be clear, investors often work back from the exit event I was talking about in the bullet above, and we say, well, what's the kind of return we're looking to make for the kind of risk profile we're looking at? What does that imply for valuation today? And then what pre-money valuation does that imply? And often we work backwards from the exit to come up with a valuation to then propose to management and existing shareholders. Having gone through all that stage, we'll then write up a much longer investment paper and go to an initial formal investment committee. That investment committee is usually being asked to approve a couple of things at this point. One is entering into a term sheet with the company we're looking at that will set out all the key terms in terms of valuation, size around, key issues we want to incorporate in the legal documents and so on. And then the other thing the investment committee is usually asked to approve at this stage is spend on due diligence, whether it be commercial, market size, that kind of analysis, or financial and tax due diligence or legal due diligence. All of those may be areas that we want to then spend our own capital on in doing due diligence. And then if we pass all those stages and we've completed our due diligence, then we come to a final investment committee. And that's asking for approval to make the investment subject to finalising the corporate documents, shareholders' agreements and articles, finalising a disclosure letter, which usually forms an important part of a funding round when management teams and existing shareholders are asked to disclose against any warranties in the investment documents. And then we proceed to the investment itself once we're through that process. So this process is typically a 3 to 6 month process. It can be done quicker, and for follow-on rounds, it's often much quicker. But for new opportunities, that kind of 3 to 6 month process is a typical timescale to go from start to finish. So now I'm going to talk about perhaps some of the more commercial aspects of what investors are looking for. What excites us, what gets out of bed in the morning, and where do we see the opportunities in the market. So let's talk about the SDGs, and I'm going to talk about the sustainable revolution, which I'm sure you're all familiar with the Al Gore phrase. He talks about a sustainable revolution with the depth of the industrial revolution, but the speed of the digital revolution. And here on this slide, I show all three revolutions: industrial revolution starting in the mid 18th century and really moving through to the mid 20th century. The digital revolution picking up from then onwards, and then the sustainable revolution from now for the coming few decades as our world changes to sustainable business models. And across the industry sectors, different advances, different business model changes will have different impacts. So in industry, we're looking at decarbonisation, we're looking at sustainable materials, we're looking at resource efficiency. In energy, looking at decentralization, renewables and storage and efficiency. Information carries many of the enabling tech that we'll see transforming sustainable markets: digitization, IoT, 5G, artificial intelligence. And then in transport, the two big ones, electrification and autonomous driving. And for people, water and food, smart cities, water efficiency and ag tech, all developing technologies and services in coming decades. And these are the kind of investment themes that investors are really excited by at the moment, because we see these as multi-decade investment themes. And we've all seen in the last few weeks how financial markets have crashed because of both the virus, but actually also because of the crash in oil prices. So very short-term impacts and short-term responses based on dramatic events that are happening in the world. But the thing about the sustainable revolution is it's here for many decades to come as we transform all the global industry sectors to sustainable models in coming decades. So these are themes that investors can hang their hats on for not days, weeks or months, but for decades. And that's one of the big attractions that's driving capital into the sustainability market. So let's talk about a couple of the SDGs. So some of the guys on the call are looking at SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. And I've just picked an example from our own portfolio here at Earth Capital, which is Propolair, which is an air-assisted flush toilet. Technology with a top lid of the toilet that clamps shut. And that allows you to put several bar of pressure into the bowl and drive an air flush. And then we use a little bit of water to clean the bowl and refill the sump at the bottom. But the overall water saving compared to standard toilets is over 80%. And this is getting a lot of traction now in water-stressed urban environments. We're selling a lot of units in the South African market, for instance, at the moment, where areas like Cape Town are suffering significant urban water stress. And both water users and the utilities are buying the product to help alleviate the water consumption problems in the market. And it's an example of a product that spans both developing and developed markets, because of also selling significant numbers of the toilets here in the UK in high footfall retail environments, where the water savings are very significant in shopping centres and motorway service stations, for instance. So this is an example of an impact technology that can go out into global markets. We can do technology transfer from markets like the UK out into markets such as South Africa. And in time, we will also take this into the Middle East and Asian markets as well, where again, urban water stress is becoming an increasing issue, either through water shortage or rapid urban expansion, which is also stressing the ability to provide water into the cities. I'm now going to talk about SDG 8, and I think this is perhaps a more general discussion around the just transition and the social impact of what we do in sustainability. On the left, the old school coal-fired power generation industry. The world has powered its electricity through coal-fired generation for the last 100, 120, 140 years. But we are migrating to the new world on the right, with wind and PV as the dominant technologies. But that migration doesn't come without social impact. We can't just lay off coal miners with no thought as to what happens next and how to take those miners and the communities they belong to into the new sustainable world. And SDG 8 is a very, very important one to focus on. A lot of people will call this the just transition. And you'll see a lot of work going on now to look at the social and economic impacts of transitioning from old fossil fuel-based industries to new, clean, renewable energy industries. And as technologies like offshore wind become so successful, we've seen in the UK tremendous advances in offshore wind with investors like the Green Investment Bank, who helped fund early projects in offshore wind. And we're now looking at turbines of over 10 megawatts going out into the North Sea and other inshore waters. Capacity factors are well over 60% for the new generation of turbines in the 2020s. And floating offshore wind now is working, and we're going to become an increasing component of the mix. And those who are developing that have told me that they're looking at water depths of up to 300 meters with the floating offshore wind. So you can see that the trend away from coal-fired and other fossil fuel-fired generation is only going to accelerate with the advances in offshore wind. And we need to bring the jobs with that and transition from the dirty industries through a just transition into the new clean industries. And just to give you some idea of the sectors we're seeing activity, this is very much our bottom-up deal flow pipeline that I pulled out of the sort of things we're seeing in the market. And as I said at the start, we're particularly focused on energy, food, water, and related sectors in terms of the deal pipeline we look at. But you can see here, clean industry is a large part of the pie. Decarbonising industrial sectors, moving them away from fossil fuels to cleaner fuels, whether it's renewable electricity or potentially hydrogen and other cleaner fuels. But industries like steel and cement and ceramics are massive consumers of fossil fuels at the moment. And those heavy industries are one of the biggest challenges in the sustainable transition to change. Mobility is here, a huge amount going on in the electrification and autonomization of the mobility sector. Electrification very active in a lot of short distance, sub 200-300 kilometer journeys, whether it be vehicles or shipping, or increasingly aviation is also going to be going electric this decade. Longer distances, when we're at 1,000 kilometers plus, other solutions, people are coming up, hydrogen, biofuels, thermochemically produced e-fuels are all potential sustainable solutions for those longer distance markets. And of course, autonomization is coming over the horizon now at a pace, but that's going to dramatically change vehicle utilization. It's going to have massive social impacts with entire social demographic groups that struggle to have access to transport at the moment. Are going to get access with autonomous vehicles, which is a very exciting development. And it's a market that's really active at the moment. And then I think the final one I'll pick out of this picture is food and agriculture. As global population heads up to 10 billion and supply side constraints are becoming worse and worse, things like fertilizer, how we make nitrogen fertilizer, where we get our phosphate fertilizer from, are becoming really pressing issues in global agriculture in coming decades. That's throwing up an enormous number of startup activities, many of whom are obviously on this call already and know the sector very well. So I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly go on to impact measurement. And this is an important thing to think of when you look at your pitch book when you're first starting talking to investors. Because most investors now are looking to do impact measurement and assess what the impact is of investments they make. So you need to be ready for that discussion and need to be able to provide the information investors are looking for. We've developed our own proprietary scorecard called the Earth Dividend here at Earth Capital, and it's designed for investment in the private markets, private equity, venture capital, and private infrastructure. And we score every prospective company we look at across 30 measures, across 5 major dimensions: natural resources, ecosystem services, pollution, social economic contribution, society, and governance. And you can see there how we can then map those major dimensions to subsets of the SDGs. In fact, we covered most of the SDGs in our scorecard. And this lets us do not only a pre-acquisition measurement of the net impact of the businesses we're looking at, but we also then use it as an annual appraisal tool to help good businesses on ESG measures become even better during the lifetime of our investment. And no business is perfect. There will always be, perhaps fossil fuel impact in the supply chain, or there might be end-of-life decommissioning costs, or similar issues. Nobody's perfect, but we're looking to get good businesses to become even better on our impact scorecard during the lifetime of our ownership. And to give you one example of why we do this and why it's so important, so let's talk about lithium-ion batteries that power the mobility revolution that I was talking about earlier. Well, they have often got lithium cobalt oxide cathodes. Now this is cobalt mining in the DRC, on the left industrial mining, on the right artisan mining. The social and economic impacts of this primary mining is not at all sustainable, and I'm sure many of you are well aware of that. Social impacts are very bad, environmental impacts are very bad as well. And I have to say, lithium mining in some South American countries isn't a lot better. So we've got at the start of the supply chain on electric vehicles with lithium-ion batteries, some really major issues in terms of social environmental impact. You can't just ignore them. And some people, I think, try and get away with a bit of impact measurement on the products that's in front of them. But if you don't look at the whole life impact, the supply chain and end of life decommissioning, you can miss a lot of issues like this. And it's why we look for net impact in all our investments. It's important not to ignore negative impacts. It's important to measure them, and it's important to try and improve them during the period of your ownership. So I'm going to wrap up by just talking about some current trends in the market. I'm going to talk about short-term trends, principally around coronavirus. And I'm going to talk about some of the longer-term trends in sustainability. I'm going to keep this very simple because I'm keen to move on to questions. So for coronavirus, I think there's two short-term impacts, one bad and one good. Investment market at the moment has been damaged by coronavirus, and corporate and retail investment are both going to struggle in the next few months, and possibly for longer than that, to be very active in the market. For a lot of corporates, they have corporate venture capital activities, investing off balance sheet, but if the share price has crashed and the balance sheet is under stress, their access to liquid funds on balance sheet will be diminished in the near term. And then for retail investors, using things like the EIS, Enterprise Investment Scheme here in the UK, or venture capital trusts as the other main tax scheme for retail investors, again, a lot of investors, when they look at the financial markets, the FTSE 100 and so on, they might either want to sit on cash or just invest in listed and liquid products. And that market at the moment is very quiet as well. So the short-term impact is getting funding rounds done this year are going to be difficult. And I've talked about the UK, but I think the European market is not very different as well. However, some positives to come out of coronavirus, and I appreciate it's a little bit hard to talk about positives at the moment, but one of the things that has really got attention now is energy, food, health, and resource security. And a lot of people who've taken global international supply chains for granted for a long time are now thinking, as those supply chains falter, as to how to get local sources of energy, of food, of health equipment, and of raw materials and resources. And of course, that ties in very closely with the sustainability agenda and what the SDGs are about, trying to meet your own demands from your local resources, your local environment in a sustainable way. So there's a real focus now on security of supply, which ties in very closely with the sustainability agenda. And then to wrap up, I'm just going to talk about investments in the SDGs more generally. All of you on this call have got certain SDGs you're particularly focused on. From an investor's perspective, we look at all of them as multi-decade opportunities. Whether it's for pension funds who we manage money for, or sovereign funds, or family offices, they're all looking at providing returns to their stakeholders and their investors over many decades. Pension funds will be thinking 50 years ahead in terms of funding pensions for people in their 20s and 30s. So the SDGs provide a great set of sectors to deliver investments that will only grow and thrive in the coming decades. And go back to the short-term financial market impacts of the coronavirus. It's been interesting that the fossil fuel companies have crashed more than some of the sustainable companies, and the ESG indexes on enlisted equities have actually outperformed in the last few weeks. And people understand now that these are business models that are more robust to shocks and are going to, they'll be here surviving the shock of the next decade, and the decade after that, there will be future surprises coming over the horizon all the time. And investment in the SDGs is great for financial returns, great for people, great for the planet. And that's why we're here, and that's why we invest in the areas we do. So thank you very much for your time. I think I should throw it straight open to questions now, and please ask away.
Great, thanks very much, Jim. That was excellent, thank you. I'll just read out a couple of questions that have come in. So this is from Nate. In this current climate, are you looking to cut back on investments to protect funds, or are you looking at companies and seeing opportunities to get in when valuations might be lower than normal?
Well, potentially both, but I'll be very candid with you at the moment. The focus is mostly on making sure all our existing portfolio companies are in a potentially to weather the challenges of certainly next 6 months, but potentially longer than that. So for most investors, us and many of the other funders in the market, that's been the primary focus. I mean, clearly, dependent on how quickly funds come back to market, the retail funds, the corporate funds, that will have an impact on valuation going forward. But I think at the moment it's too early for me to speculate. I think that's a question I'll be in a better place to answer in the summer or maybe September time. Right now, it's more the focus is just making sure our existing family of portfolio companies are all in good shape to weather the storm.
Yes, of course. I've got a question about where you see healthcare fitting in the sustainable revolution. I know at the beginning you said healthcare wasn't a particular focus of your fund, but...
Yes, no, I understand. I mean, healthcare is an absolutely vital part of the sustainable revolution. When you look at the provision of healthcare in developing markets, it goes hand in hand with provision of services like electric power, like mobile telephony, like education. So the SDGs are very much integrated. As I say, we tend to focus more on energy, food, and water, but that's just because as an investor you tend to want to specialise to a certain extent. But healthcare is a massive part of it. And when we're investing in markets, in some of our African investments, for instance, some of the community benefits that we can bring from our renewable energy project include both primary care facilities as well as education facilities as well, and sanitation I've touched on, just providing toilet blocks for local communities, for instance, clean sanitation, which often wasn't there before, is part and parcel of the community benefits that we can bring. So yeah, healthcare is a massive part of delivering the SDGs globally.
Thanks. I'll just check the next question. So I've got a question. In terms of how you source your pipeline, excuse me, or build your pipeline from the business's point of view, how would you advise going about a business getting on the radar of investors?
So what I like to see is an early sight of a business with maybe a one-page teaser or a short PowerPoint deck. And I like to see that early because I know about a business and it's in my deal database. And the reason for keeping it short is, I looked at over 1,000 deals last year in sustainability. And other investors will be seeing similar quantities of deal flow. So we see a huge amount going on, and despite uncertainties over Brexit in the UK or now coronavirus, entrepreneurial activity is not stopping at all, and the attendee list on this call proves that. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial activity, whether it's the UK, wider Europe, or globally. And I just like to see something that's a quick summary. Investors don't have time to do non-disclosure agreements up front. I mean, we do them much later in the due diligence process when there's seriously confidential information to be shared. But for your initial teaser, you should be sharing non-confidential information. It should be things that to be honest, I'd probably find on your company website. So that's the way to get in front of me and other investors quickly. Then we know about you. You're in our database. When we come to look at a sector like, say, water sector, and we're looking at what our focus areas will be in water in the next 6 months, say, which is an exercise we often do, going through the different sectors. We'll look at water 1 month and food the next month and energy the one after. So we do a review, and then we're always we know where a company is. If it's doing a seed round or a Series A venture round, or it's at a later stage where it's just looking to develop, to raise working capital to do infrastructure development. So, building renewable energy projects in Africa, or healthcare infrastructure, or agricultural infrastructure. We know where they are in their development cycle, and then they're kind of on our radar screen. And when we look at opportunities which might be 50 or even more at a time, companies are in the mix, and they're on our radar.
Great, thanks. That's really good advice, really helpful. Thank you. So I think the message from us to the cohort is to start thinking about investment earlier than you'd expect to, because it's really important to prepare thoroughly and prepare well, and it does take time. And so we are keen to support you around investment readiness, and that is something that KTN is looking at ways to support. So do get in touch with us about that in relation to your particular support needs, and we will see how we can help with that. I just want to say a big thank you, Jim. That was really fantastic presentation. Great.
Well, thank you for your time. And if anyone gets to the point where they're looking to do that that investment round, please get in touch with me at the time. Great.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jim. Right, we're now moving on to our next speaker, who is Zoe. If you can, here we go. Zoe Jones is from Innovate UK and is our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Programme Lead. And she's going to talk to you briefly about equality, diversity and inclusion, and how to think about that through your phase 1 projects.
Thanks, Jo. Hi, everyone. Happy to be talking to you all today, and hope you're all keeping well in this really difficult time. So I'll start by recapping and introducing why EDI is important to business and innovation, what our approach is at Innovate UK, and then, as Jo said, talk a bit about what your answers or your gender equality and social inclusion plans look like, and how we would like you to continue thinking about that through your phase 1 project. So embracing diversity and inclusion is a huge opportunity for business. It's not just a nice to have, it can fundamentally enhance profitability. So this is some research from McKinsey that I shared at the briefing events last year, that finds that diversity on executive boards, in particular gender diversity and ethnic and cultural diversity, positively increases the likelihood of financial performance by quite a significant amount. So it's just worth touching on that. But more than the positives, what can go wrong without diversity and inclusion? And there is a lot. So lack of diversity and embedded bias can have serious negative implications on innovation and business, and really importantly, the users and the markets that the innovations and products are developed for. So there's a few examples on here. Drawing on one of them, Google's speech recognition software, when it was initially launched, was trained predominantly on male voices, which made the software 70% more likely to understand men, which is really not the type of innovations that we want to see being created. So equality, diversity and inclusion at Innovate UK. At Innovate UK, we're committed to encouraging EDI and business-led innovation. We strongly believe that the best ideas for innovation can come from anyone, and that diversity within business is proven to contribute to enhanced performance and commercial success. And also that diverse teams and people that think with different frameworks produce better outcomes. So at Innovate UK, we have targeted programs which include Young Innovators, which supports young people from diverse backgrounds to grow their ideas into businesses, and also our Women in Innovation programme, which we started back in 2016 when we discovered that only 1 in 7 applications to Innovate UK's funding and support were led by women. This has now increased to 1 in 4. Both of these programmes include financial support and tailored non-financial support. So, and there's actually one of our Women in Innovation award holders in this cohort, Debbie Wake. So as well as this, we work across our major programmes and other activities at Innovate UK to embed equality, diversity and inclusion across everything that we do. And GCRF is one of those programmes. So within the Demonstrate Impact competition, there was a gender equality and social inclusion question that we asked you all to answer, which was part of the scope question. This ensures that we are understanding from you how you are considering gender equality and social inclusion throughout your projects, so that we can all be compliant with the International Development Act, and really to understand how your projects are helping to promote gender equality and social inclusion, not to perpetuate any existing issues. So just wanted to talk a little bit about as well a particular sector, an example that I've seen recently where a strong consideration of gender equality and social inclusion in projects and businesses can really produce great outcomes in the development context. So this is particularly focused on energy access, and it's a recent article from the Global Distributors Collective. So they've pulled together lots of different energy access and last mile distribution research, and found that female sales agents in particular projects have a really unique role in reaching untapped markets and building trust with risk-averse customers. That women entrepreneurs in Kenya in a Clean Cooking Alliance project sold 3 times as many stoves as their male peers. But men tend to have more influence over purchasing decisions and greater control of off-grid solar assets and benefit more than women do. Also thinking about the impacts that some of these energy access projects have produced. So 90% of female respondents in Tanzania reported that their time was more flexible after receiving solar electricity. So this tackled things like the double burden that many women face in those contexts to both earn an income and complete domestic chores. So it's really just bringing attention to an example in the energy access sector, that really thinking about gender equality and gender relations at the outset of projects can produce really demonstrable positive impacts for the users and also for the businesses that are involved. So this was just a quick recap on the application question. So we understood from you all who was involved, so any kind of gender equality and social inclusion experience you had, and partners and collaborators that you intended or already were working with, which is really helpful to us. We also got a strong understanding from you all how you're factoring this into your project plan and what the potential was. And I just thought it would be worth recapping and building on something that Joe mentioned earlier, that there really is a wealth of gender equality and social inclusion experience within the cohort, from working on previous projects or the organisations that and businesses that you lead. So we would encourage speaking to each other about some of the gender equality and social inclusion strategies that you have. We saw a really strong use of contextual data to understand the users and markets that you'd be working with, which was really great to see. And for many of the businesses and organisations in the cohort, enabling inclusion and participation of particular underrepresented groups was at the core of many of the innovations and projects. So also there was a lot of people that mentioned that applications where new partnerships needed to be built, and we thought that was really positive. So something that I wanted to touch on was that measurable plans to show impact linked to gender equality and social inclusion was really important, and that's something that we'd like people to think about throughout phase 1. So some people set KPIs that were specifically linked to and targets specifically linked to user engagement and ensuring participation from diverse groups. So also reporting on where project teams are adapting their processes and approaches to ensure that any interaction with users and workshops are inclusive. So that was great. And then I just thought we'd quickly touch on this quote as well. So there is much talk in innovation about the importance of diversity, and this is no doubt vital for everything from generating new ideas through to disseminating new approaches. But this diversity is not something that comes easily. Genuine innovation requires careful brokering of common ground between very different actors and mindsets, and then to think about who gains from innovation, by how much, in what ways, and with what development implications. So I just wanted to reflect on that it was really positive to see so many projects in the cohort talking about the diverse range of partners that they needed to work with in order to produce really impactful and inclusive innovation, and to lead on to something that we're working on at Innovate UK and the KTN. So we want to make sure that you all in the cohort and other businesses and innovators can consider diversity and inclusion in their projects and businesses more widely. And we're exploring different ways to do that and provoke questions and thoughts like this. So if you're interested in participating in some user research that we're doing to build up that toolkit and capacity, then I'd urge you to get in touch. And similarly, with any other questions that you have about the presentation or gender equality and social inclusion in your projects, just get in touch with me and I'd be happy to help. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Zoe. That was very helpful. And yes, please do take part in that user research if you can. I guess I've just got a couple of small points to make on this. I think it's really important when you're doing your project work to think about the disproportionate impact on certain groups of lack of access to innovation. So for example, going back to the water example, you know, women and girls in particular are often disproportionately impacted by the lack of access to water because they're the ones that are tasked with going to collect it, and that takes up their time and might make them more vulnerable, etc. And so I think that's often an interesting way to think about how different groups might be disproportionately impacted, but also might disproportionately benefit from an innovation because they will get, like that example showed, more time back if they don't have to make those journeys to get water and so on. So I think it's interesting to reflect on that. Also, there's a really growing interest in gender lens investing. And so again, those are investors who have an intent to invest in addressing gender issues and promoting gender equality. And so that's also something to keep in mind, is that addressing these issues is not only good for impact, but it can also open up business and potentially investment opportunities as well. So I don't think there are any more questions on that, and I believe that I'm next to talk about yes, right. Can you see this screen? Charlie, can you check if you can see this screen?
We're still on Zoe's screen.
No, okay, let me try that again. Okay, share again. Right, let's have a go at this. Has that worked?
Yes, so if you just go into presenter mode now.
Yeah, okay, great. So I want to talk about the process for phase 2 and also what we want to get out of phase 1 in terms of reporting and learning. So the phase 2 process, applicants for phase 2 will need to submit the following documents. applicants an end of phase 1 report, and we will provide a template for that, and that will be uploaded as part of your phase 2 application. And there will also be an online application form similar to phase 1, but for phase 2. Now, I hope to be able to send out the formatted phase 1 report within a week. It's just undergoing some review, and then will be formatted, and then I can send that to you just so you know what we're going to expect at the end of phase 1. But I can give you a preview at the moment in terms of the section headings that just gives you an idea of what we're really interested in learning about at the end of phase 1. So what we're really interested in learning is about what you discovered. So at the outset of this report, we're going to ask you to redefine the problem statement that you were addressing and the hypothesis you've tested during phase 1. Now, there might be more than one, and they might have changed, and so we're also interested in that, and that's fine. We just really want us to tell you what you wanted to test during phase 1. Tell us about the assumptions that you had at the outset, and how you validated those assumptions, how you went about that, how your assumptions may have changed, and how you then assessed new assumptions. How did you test if people, users, customers, stakeholders wanted your innovation? And what have you learnt about that? And we really want as much richness in this as possible, as many insights as possible. How has what you've learned influenced how you might want to adapt your innovation or your business model for phase 2? We're interested in the design challenges that you have come up against and that you will need to account for in your phase 2 prototype. And also the challenges that you faced on a kind of implementation level in phase 1 and how you managed to overcome these. Then there's some practical things that we're interested in terms of, did you utilise any of the support that we offered? How was that? We'd love to get your feedback on that. And then some practical things around, did you submit project change requests, and give us some details about that. We're very interested in partner engagement. Now, many of you have existing partners, and these may change, or you may add to those for phase 2. And so we're very interested in knowing what partners you've lined up for your phase 2. And it is fine if you need to change partners. And then we're obviously interested in the budget and the forecast costs against the actual costs, and any other comments you want to add. And this is really your chance to tell us not just about the activities that you've completed, but really represent and extract the learning and the insights and the challenges and the things that didn't work. We're interested in the things that didn't work as much as the things that did work. You know, if it's all very neat and went swimmingly smoothly, we'd be very suspicious. So we're very interested to know the messy reality of what happened. And we're keen that you're as open with us as possible about that, because we really value openness and that attitude of, well, we tried this, it didn't work, so we tried that, etc. And we completely understand that it's a process, an iterative journey, and we're very interested to get an insight and a view on that, and to how you're working. So, you know, what we're really interested in at phase 2 is your attitude towards that learning, and your commitment and your tenacity in terms of tackling those challenges. So that's what we're looking for at phase 1, at the end of phase 1. And I'm really excited to learn about the insights that you've gained. In phase 2, it will be an online application form that is currently being designed, but these are the broad things that obviously we'll be assessing against. So obviously ODA compliance is a priority. Now, you are all currently ODA compliant because you've got through to phase 1, but we just need to be aware that there hasn't been any sort of slippage, or focus and priorities around impact may have changed, and so on. As Zoe said, we're interested in gender equality and social inclusion, market viability, what you've learned about that, what you've learned about user-focused design, the team that you've put together, have you added to that team, the partners you've put together. Then we'll also obviously be looking at the finances, implementation plan, impact pathway, the innovation itself, and the commercial potential for commercial sustainability. So those are the things to keep in mind that we're through phase 1, because we will want to assess you against those in phase 2. Now, the original timeline for phase 2 applications is that they're due to open on the 31st of August, and the deadline for the application is the 28th of October. So what we're going to do is we've had response from the majority of the cohort so far, and approximately half are going to try and do their phase 1 within the 6-month time frame. And so we are going to still open the competition on these dates and go through that phase of phase 2 application. But we will also open 1 or probably 2 more rounds of phase 2 applications at staggered dates. And those staggered dates are slightly to be confirmed. I mean, it may be a 3-month and a 6-month stagger. But obviously it does depend on if and when travel restrictions are lifted. And so the intention is to have additional opportunities to apply for phase 2 at later dates. I guess that's the key message, and we will confirm those dates over the coming month or so. So I guess the next question is probably, how do we handle allocations? So I want to be really transparent with you. For phase 2 of this round, we have £7.5 million, and we allow applications of up to £500,000 per business as the maximum grant amount. And on that basis, if everyone applied for the maximum, we could fund 15 businesses at the maximum amount. So one question I'm sure you have is, what happens if I'm delayed for 6 months and the money's run out? So I've got a few responses to that. First of all, funds are definitely not allocated on a first come, first served basis. They're only allocated on merit and whether or not they meet our standards and criteria for a phase 2 project, and whether it's something that we actually want to support and we think is really meeting our remit. So if you're the first to apply, but we're not convinced by the case you've made for phase 2, then we won't fund you. It doesn't matter when you apply. If we're not convinced, you won't get the money. Secondly, we're going to pay really close attention to budgets, and we're going to ask you to just apply for what you need in order to demonstrate your innovation in the market. We're not funding you to scale up your innovation. That requires later stage funding. This funding is just for demonstration stage. And so in some cases, with some technologies, you may well need £500,000 in order to justifiably demonstrate your technology. And you are allowed to apply for that maximum amount. But in many cases, I suspect that you could demonstrate adequately and successfully for less money. Now, the more projects in phase 2 that have lower budgets or slightly lower budgets, the more projects we can obviously fund. And this actually happened in phase 1. Not all of you applied for the maximum of £60,000 grant at phase 1. And that actually allowed us to fund a whole additional project. Even though they were just small reductions in the budget across a number of you, that enabled us to have an additional 60,000 that we could fund an extra project. And so obviously you all came into this competition expecting that phase 2 would bring £500,000. And again, I'm going to say you can apply for that amount, but you really have to justify it very clearly in your budget. And we'll be looking closely at budgets to see, okay, can you do it for less? Is that a possibility? Now, I have done this before in the previous accelerator that I worked for before this. In the first round, we gave everyone the maximum amount, the same amount of grant. But in the subsequent 3 rounds, we adopted a much more bespoke approach and asked everyone to budget for what they needed in order to prototype. And so I think that's the approach that we're going to take, and I hope that you can all sort of sign up to that approach, because in this very challenging time, we are going to have to be flexible and take a staggered approach to phase 2. And so if we all apply for just what we need, then we hope that we can fund as many of you as possible with what you need and when you need it. And I think that's really the key to this strategy under these exceptional circumstances. So what I would suggest is, when it comes to doing budgets, work really closely with your monitoring officer and also with me, and give us previews of your budgets, and we can give feedback and sort of really work closely together to get to a budget which you're happy with, that will fulfill everything that you need, without any sort of extras that you may not need, and that could therefore fund other projects who will be coming into a later stage. So that's what we're going to do. That's the approach that we're going to take. I'm very happy to answer questions on that. Let me just, yes.
We have a question from Ian Boyd.
Yeah.
Hi Joe, do we know yet if the Qualtrics online support completion report will also be needed for phase 1, as there will be some duplication? Normally all participants must do this for all grant funding.
Yes, thanks. I'm sorry, I thought I had come back to you on that, and I obviously haven't. We're not going to do Qualtrics online for this phase 1.
Okay, we've got a question from Nate. Would we be allowed to submit with what we have by the 31st of August for the initial deadline? And if unsuccessful, reapply with the extra phase 1 works for the extended timeline?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I hadn't thought about it before. Let me talk to the competitions team about it. I mean, I'd say, yeah, that is interesting. I would say if you're really way off, it's definitely not worth applying, because then it will just take up time and resource, and if you haven't been able to do sort of half of your activities, I wouldn't apply. If you're very close, I think probably the best thing to do is to talk to us at that time, and see whether we think that enough has been done to warrant an application at that time. I think it's probably better to do that rather than go through the whole application process, which is obviously very time consuming in itself. So I think that would be my answer for the moment, is talk to us. And I think throughout all of this, because of these circumstances, the most important thing is communication, and keeping those lines of communication with us open, and coming to us to discuss these types of questions, and to get our feedback.
I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions if anyone wants to type a question in.
No? Okay. Well, that's fine. Obviously, like I said, we're happy to have one-to-one conversations about this if you prefer to do it that way. I know the next few months are going to be really challenging and uncertain and tough. But I have, like I said, seen amazing resilience already from this group, and I know that you're all determined to do what you can under the circumstances, and we will also do what we can to support you in terms of flexibility. So please update us on your challenges and your support requirements, and keep in touch. That's the most important thing, and good luck, and thanks very much for attending.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending. Thank you.